The alarm had been screaming for 4 minutes before anyone figured out what had actually escaped. Station Viridian 9 was not a prison. That was what the Galactic Research Consortium told every new recruit, every inspection committee, every journalist who somehow managed to get clearance. It was a containment and study facility, a distinction that felt meaningful in the glossy brochures and meaningless at 3 in the morning when red lights were strobing down every corridor and the intercom was cycling through evacuation protocols in 11 languages. Dr. Chloe Bennett was already moving before the second alarm tone finished its pattern. She pulled up the containment breach log on her wrist display as she jogged, her boots squeaking against the polished floor. Sector 7. Specimen designation, UNK-14. Unknown classification. Unknown biology. Unknown everything, which was exactly why UNK-14 had warranted a Level 5 containment cell when it arrived 6 weeks ago aboard a salvage vessel, curled into itself like something that had decided the universe wasn't worth looking at. Nobody had been able to make contact. Nobody had been able to classify it. It had simply existed in its cell, breathing, or doing something that looked like breathing, and watching the researchers through the reinforced polymer wall with an expression that Chloe had privately described in her notes as exhausted patience. She had liked UNK-14. She hadn't told anyone that. Mason Turner was on the opposite side of the station when the breach triggered, running night security in the logistics bay, a job that mostly involved reading, occasional coffee, and making sure the supply drones didn't clip the shelving units again. He heard the alarm, checked his station map, and saw the breach icon blinking in Sector 7. Then he did something that no one on the emergency response team would fully understand later, when they reviewed the security footage. He stopped at the break room. He was in there for 43 seconds. Then he continued towards Sector 7. The creature had not gone far. That was the first thing the response team discovered when they reached Sector 7. The containment cell door was open, the locking mechanism carefully and inexplicably dismantled from the inside, and UNK-14 was sitting approximately 12 meters down the corridor. Just sitting. It was large. That was the word Chloe always came back to when she tried to describe it. Not tall, not wide, not imposing in any specific direction. Simply large in the way that certain old trees were large, in a way that suggested depth and time and roots going somewhere you couldn't see. Its surface was dark and seemed to shift slightly with its breathing, textured like cooling volcanic glass. It had too many limbs arranged in a geometry that shouldn't have worked, but clearly did. Its eyes, 3 of them, arranged vertically on what was probably its face, were open and watching the 6 armed response officers who had fanned out in front of it with weapons raised. It hadn't moved toward them. It hadn't moved at all. Chloe stepped through the response line before Commander Voss could grab her arm, which he attempted. He failed. Dr. Bennett. It's not attacking, she said. Look at it. It's not attacking. She was right. UNK-14 was watching the weapons with those 3 stacked eyes, and its posture, if posture was the right word for something built the way it was built, read to Chloe as profoundly, deeply tired. Not cornered animal tired. Not dangerous tired. The tired of something that had been through something long and had come out the other side still breathing, but not entirely sure what to do next. She crouched down, putting herself below its eyeline. It was a contact gesture she'd read about in the xenobiology literature, mostly theoretical. She didn't have anything better. UNK-14's top eye moved to her, then the middle one, then the bottom. Hey, Chloe said. I know this isn't ideal. Something shifted in the creature's surface texture, a ripple that moved from the center outward, like a stone dropped in still water. She didn't know what it meant. She wrote it down mentally anyway. Mason arrived at the rear of the response cluster 40 seconds later. He assessed the situation in approximately 3 seconds. Large unknown alien in corridor, weapons drawn, Chloe Bennett crouching in front of it doing the slow voice thing she did when she was trying not to escalate something. Standard Tuesday energy for Sector 7, honestly. He did not draw his weapon. He unslung the bag he'd grabbed from the break room, crouched down against the wall a few meters to the left of Chloe, and opened it quietly. Commander Voss turned to look at him. Turner, why do you have a bag? Snacks, Mason said. A pause that contained multitudes. What? Snacks, sir. Mason reached into the bag and produced a protein bar, a bag of salted crackers, 2 tangerines, and a sealed container of mixed nuts. He set them on the floor in a small, deliberate row. I don't know what it eats. So I got variety. UNK 14 had gone very still. Not tense still. Not threat still. The kind of still that meant something had happened that required full processing. All three eyes had moved from Chloe to Mason to the small row of food items on the floor, and they stayed there. Chloe stared at Mason for a moment. Then she turned back to UNK 14. He does things like this, she said conversationally. It's actually one of his better qualities. Mason slid the crackers a few centimeters closer to the center of the corridor. Not trying to lure you anywhere, he said, his voice easy and unhurried in the way it got when he wasn't performing calm but actually felt it. Just figured you might be hungry. Or whatever the version of hungry is for you. Long night. UNK 14's surface rippled again. Longer this time, slower, moving in a different pattern than before. One of its limbs extended. Carefully, with a precision that suggested it was very aware of how it might look to the armed humans watching it. It touched the bag of salted crackers. It didn't open them. It just rested one limb against the packaging and held there, and the surface ripple moved through it again in long, slow waves. That's okay, Mason said. You don't have to eat them. They're just there. Chloe felt something shift in her chest that she was going to have trouble writing objectively in her incident report. What followed was not dramatic. That was the part that made it into the station logs as unusual, because everything about a containment breach was supposed to be dramatic. The danger, the resolution, the lesson learned. But UNK 14 did not attempt to flee. It did not attack. It sat in the corridor for another 2 hours and 17 minutes while Chloe talked to it, and Mason sat against the wall eating one of the tangerines, occasionally narrating small observations about station life in the same unhurried tone he'd used from the beginning. Somewhere in the second hour, UNK 14 opened the crackers. It did not eat them in any way Chloe could biologically categorize, but it did something with them that seemed to involve absorption at the limb surface. And afterward, the ripple pattern changed again to something that the xenolinguistics team would later spend 3 months analyzing before tentatively classifying as contentment adjacent. When Commander Voss finally asked, through clenched teeth, how they planned to get UNK 14 back to containment, Chloe said, I don't think containment is what we should be talking about anymore. Voss stared at her. It got out on its own, she said. It came and sat in the corridor. It didn't go for the exits. It didn't hurt anyone. She looked at the creature, who had one limb still loosely around the cracker packaging and all three eyes currently aimed at Mason, who was explaining why tangerines were underrated citrus. I think it wanted to be somewhere that wasn't a cell. I think it was telling us something. It's an unknown species, Voss said. All species are unknown until they aren't, Chloe replied. UNK 14 was reclassified within the month. Not because they figured out what it was. That process was ongoing, likely for years. But because containment became residence in the official documentation, because Chloe pushed and the data supported her, and Mason wrote a 1-paragraph security assessment that said, essentially, it has demonstrated no threatening behavior and was responsive to basic social interaction. Recommend revised protocol. The revised protocol included a snack allowance. Mason restocked it personally every Thursday. Crackers, usually. Sometimes something new, always labeled with a small note explaining what it was and where it came from, because he'd read somewhere that context mattered. UNK 14's surface would ripple every Thursday when he came in. The long, slow kind. The xenolinguistics team had a name for that pattern now. They called it a greeting.